well, I thank the ones that are here for your particular interest in these evangelistic journeys. And as I frequently do, this one was to South America, by the way. Thank you for the many different ways you support and encourage me. Sometimes it's financial, but it's a lot more than that. Your interest is an encouragement to me. I started these several years ago, and I guess it takes a certain amount of energy and momentum to continue. I draw some of that energy and momentum from you all. It seems like in each of these journeys, especially in the past few years, although I try to plan them very carefully, sometimes there are unexpected events that come up. And the good news is that sometimes those unexpected events are the ones that provide the best opportunities, the most unusual opportunities. And that was certainly the case in this journey. I mentioned this is not the first time I've gone to South America. The first time that I went to South America was to Guyana. Past trips are in red there as you look at them. When the Gondoses came here, I was encouraged to go to Guyana, and I did. And that was in 2009, and that was probably pretty much the beginning of the series. Went back to Paraguay, then Ecuador, Colombia. This trip is Brazil, Argentina, and Uruguay. And it's the one that's yellow in color. I'd ask you to particularly notice where it is, because after I taught in Brazil, I came down here to Buenos Aires, and then just kind of right across that little inlet of that river to Uruguay. So I was grateful for the opportunities. It seemed like this trip, it took a little longer for the contacts to come together, and I'll explain that more in a minute. But first I went to Brazil. And you look on the map and you think, Brazil is pretty big. And I thought, well, how big? Is it as big as Texas? It's 13 times the size of Texas. Brazil is a big place. The place that I went was Belo Horizonte. It's represented by the little red dot there. I'd never heard of that particular town, but trying to find places, exercise contacts, places that I could go. Over the years, there have been some difficult parts about some of these trips. Sometimes it's the environment. I've gone to places that are not the most sanitary places. Sometimes that's a little hard to endure. Sometimes the travel is difficult. But all in all, probably the persistent problem is getting a contact in some place. And, I got a contact in Belo Horizonte. So although I'd never heard of it, that was where I went. This guy beside me was my contact point that I corresponded with before I went there. His name is Lucas. He served as the translator. At first glance, you might say, well, he was probably your bodyguard too. A lot of comments about that. But he was at Belo Horizonte, 200 miles north of Rio de Janeiro. He was a good guy. He was very helpful. And indeed, I always felt safe when I was with him. And it was interesting. My understanding of South America was not that defined and discerning, but it's not Spanish, it's Portuguese. And Brazil is Portuguese, so I was somewhat surprised by that. But this guy could speak it, and I always felt good with him. And he had arranged for, that's Lucas on the right, my guide, host, and translator. And he had arranged for a friend of his, Manu, for the transportation. Manu's an Uber driver. And that was convenient. He says, hey, I'll just charge Stan for the gas and provide the transportation. And he did. And on a side note, I never knew that Manu was the short form of Emmanuel. And as some of you all asked, don't we wonder that about Manu Ginobili? But he agreed to help and take care of that. He has a legal education. He's finished the education part of becoming a lawyer. He has just not yet finished the degree, serving as an Uber driver to make some money along the way, been married only 3 months. I'll tell you more about that in a minute. But there was another kind of interesting part of the story, and that was, you may or you probably do not remember, that several years ago, I visited the Opokus in Stockholm, Sweden. I read in John Grubb's newsletter an article written by this George Opoku that says, hey, we have souls up here in Sweden too. Why don't some of you all come and see them? And so I rearranged my journey to go by there and spent 2 or 3 days with that family, with George and his wife. And then later I was looking for a contact in Ghana, and I thought, George, by the way, was originally from Ghana. He went to Stockholm probably 20 years before I got there in 2010, and met the Swedish lady there, married her, and that was the Church of Christ, I think, in the Stockholm area for many years. They had been meeting there almost 20 years by the time I went there, and only then were they had they grown enough to rent an outside facility, for their services. So, and I found that consistently. It's a very long story. People from Ghana. Remember the scripture in Acts, it says that the people, when they left Jerusalem, they went everywhere preaching the word. I'm telling you, the people from Ghana go everywhere preaching the word. I've met them in a great number of places. Anyhow, that's the background. I met Lucas, and I posted that picture of Lucas, and I immediately heard from the Opokus. It turns out that George Opoku was the one who had baptized Lucas. Evidently they were in Israel. I think George was a part of a tour group or leading a tour group, and Lucas was providing the translation. But they met. I said they go everywhere preaching the word, right? So he was the one that converted and baptized Lucas, baptized him in the Jordan River. I mean, any river is fine, but that's just kind of interesting. So that was kind of a bit of a small world story. But, so, riding along in the Uber with Manu, I began to learn about his wife. She wasn't a Christian. And talking to her and her talking to him, finally she agreed to study. She had never studied, the Bible with any member of the church. And at first she was kind of reluctant. You can tell when they're reluctant. They'll say, okay, I'll talk to you tomorrow, but I'm not really sure that I'm going to have any time the next day to do this. When they start stacking their excuses in advance, you don't know how things are going to turn out. We got together and started studying. We studied 3 hours on Friday. I had the joy, the pleasure, and the privilege of teaching a lot of people. Few of them have had the enthusiasm of this woman. Once she started learning, it's like, people think the Bible is just a big mystery, nobody can understand it. When they begin to find out they can understand it, they get excited. She was excited. They didn't want to quit. I was the one that said, well, it's been 3 hours now. Maybe we ought to take a bit of a break. And on the right-hand side, you probably recognize some of these. Those from my Wednesday night class would recognize these pictures. These are the ones that I draw to explain who was the law of Moses for. It really wasn't for any of us. For a different people of a different time. And talked about the different scriptures that say it no longer has authority. And at the bottom slide there, if you can see, it's the Roman is the one about that you confess for salvation. 2 Corinthians 7:10, you have repentance for salvation, and then baptism for or unto salvation. And usually if I'm doing that to an English audience, if they're familiar with the King James, the first two say unto. Acts 2:38, as most people read, it says for. So I very carefully explained, show them the American Standard Version 1901, it's the same word. American Standard Version has unto salvation in each case. Tell them it's the same Greek word. But it's interesting sometimes, although I'm telling them the words in English and my translator's translating them, they've got their Bibles there. So what I've learned to do is once in a while, what does your Bible say? Because it may, depending on their version of the Bible, say something very different. If you can see there, it turns out that in the Portuguese Bible, it is exactly the same word. Just like it is in our American Standard Version. So I thought that was kind of neat to see. But taught them 3 hours on Friday. They agreed to have some more, meet again for some more lessons on Saturday. We studied for 3 hours on Saturday, and she had to go to work. But we reassembled about 10:30 or 11 that night and baptized both of them at night. Both of them. Because in the discussions with him, both I and Lucas, who was with me, realized he didn't really understand what he was doing when he was baptized. And we both got that impression and talked about it. We didn't mention it immediately because I was going to be going through the lessons so you'd know what to do to be baptized with his wife, and so he was going to be able to hear those. But finally I said, did you think you were already saved when you were baptized? Yeah. So the people who had taught him had some truth, maybe with a little admixture of error, but anyhow, managed to baptize both of them. And that's unusual. As you know, usually I go to places where there are groups of Christians, and I have a chance to teach them or encourage them, maybe admonish them, but I rarely have an opportunity to teach those who are not Christians. This was different. This was neat. That was very enjoyable. Hotel. You kind of wonder what kind of hotels you're going to find in a different country. People couldn't have been nicer. The swimming pool closed at 10, but the desk person called the manager up at home and got permission to open the swimming pool up again at 11 or 11:30, so we would have access to it for the baptism. So, not exactly something that I was smart enough to plan, but it was a very enjoyable experience. So, baptized both of them because he had not understood. So, that was the first thing that happened there in Belo Horizonte. Spent 6 hours teaching those people, another couple of hours meeting with them to baptize them. I also had a chance, they were having an area-wide youth meeting. So I'm not in any of those pictures because I was taking the pictures, but I had a chance to talk to the youth to present a message that I thought would be also encouraging to them. Well, it was time to leave, and I really hated to leave those people. I'd spent many hours with them, very enjoyable group of people, and have been, messaging back and forth with them. And it's going to be interesting. They're probably going to have a little difficulty finding an appropriate place to worship, but especially Lucas. He seemed like a squared away guy. So that was in Brazil, Belo Horizonte, Brazil, and then moved on down the coast to Buenos Aires in Argentina. And I put that picture there on the left. Each town seems to kind of have something that symbolizes the town. Well, in their case, it was the letters BA for Buenos Aires, cut out of trees, cut out of a huge hedge. I guess I don't know what it was. But it had a monument in the middle. It looked familiar to me. It kind of looked like the one in Washington, D.C. I thought it looked pretty big, but I looked up the height on Google and found out that the one in D.C. is 2.5 times the height of that one. And one other comment about the weather, because as I was going down there, people said, well, down south it's really going to be hot. And I said, well, for a ways that's true, but once you cross over the equator, it's wintertime down there. So it was with some amount of joy that from time to time on Facebook I would post the temperatures that I was having, because I think I was down there during one of the hottest weeks of the summer for here. But the temperatures in the 50s, one morning when I woke up, it was 38 degrees. So that was very pleasant. So, moving on to Buenos Aires, Argentina. And there, my contact was a guy named Diego Bravo. Somebody had referred, I'll tell you how I found him. But he actually lived over in Uruguay. But again, it's just a 2-hour boat ride from one to the other. So he came from his home in Uruguay. He came over to Argentina, met me, could not have been in better hands. In terms of somebody who was familiar with the transportation, familiar with knew his way around, and he came over, and actually his wife and his little girl came over also, and that was kind of fun. And I don't know, again, sometimes the contacts are the most difficult. So how did I get in contact with somebody in Uruguay? Well, several years ago, I met a man who lived in the Bahamas. By the way, he lives in Freeport in the Bahamas, and it was a disaster there from the hurricane. The last aerial picture or satellite picture I saw of the area, half of the island where he lives on the Grand Bahama. Half of that island was still blue, still covered with water. So some from here have sent some money to try to help him recover, and he's been extremely grateful for that. He was the one who helped me figure out how to get to Cuba. Back in those days, you couldn't just schedule a flight to Cuba. There were only certain places in the U.S. from which you could fly. You could fly from Toronto, you could fly from Panama. So he helped me get to Cuba. When I went to Cuba, I met a preacher there who had graduated from the preaching school in Quito, Ecuador. So he gave me a contact to Quito, Ecuador. While I was in Quito, Ecuador, one of the students there just especially befriended me, was very nice. And he was helping me find contacts down here. And he says, have you ever been to Uruguay? And I said, no. So it was the preaching student, current preaching student, not a graduate, current preaching student in Quito who put me in contact with this guy. And actually it was his wife that knew these particular people. But this guy, Diego, was excellent. He was my point of contact. He was the one who took me around, my guide and translator in Buenos Aires. And it was interesting to spend time with him. He was just a good guy. And as I learned more about him, what I found out was he had been particularly effective in converting his relatives. You know, those of you who weren't born in the church, and as I did, found it a little bit later in life, you know that talking to your relatives sometimes can be really challenging. He had converted almost all of his relatives. And again, he lives down in Uruguay, but that's not that far from Buenos Aires. So we were in Buenos Aires, and he said, Stan, I have an aunt and uncle that I have not yet converted. I have not been able to sit down with them and study the Bible. I would like for you to meet them. I would like for them to meet you. And as they do things a lot later there than we do things here, we met like at 10 o'clock at a cafe and spent 2 hours, and I had a chance to meet them and talk to them. Very pleasant people. And I'm sitting there thinking, you know, I don't want it to be too abrupt, but I've got to bring up the topic of religion. You know, this is an opportunity. I don't want to pass by the opportunity. And finally did and had a good discussion through him as the translator. And they were very pleasant. We talked about some of their bad experiences in religion. A lot of people have had bad experiences with religion. And by the time I left there, we were communicating as well as we could on Facebook Messenger. And I got this message, just smiled all day. He said for the first time, he really wanted to study the Bible. So now he will give his nephew an opportunity to do that. So one of those unexpected but very satisfying opportunities. And he arranged also for me to teach some classes. And this is one of the classes that I taught. This was a Tuesday night Bible study in one of the churches there in Buenos Aires. And what was interesting there was about 2/3 of the people were from Venezuela. And I'm mixing in several stories, connecting several different dots, but not long after I had been to the first couple of places in South America, I met some people from Venezuela. They had left Venezuela. They had family there. Stan, I want you to come and teach my family. And then we talked about it some more, and they concluded, and I agreed, that it probably would not be good for me to go to Venezuela. And I have rechecked that proposition several times, and they say, no, you don't want to be an American going to Venezuela. Well, here I am in Buenos Aires. 2/3 of the people in the class were from Venezuela. So the moral of the story is, you don't have to go to Venezuela to teach people from Venezuela. They were there. And 2 brothers were there, and they began to talk about their family that lived in, I guess, kind of the suburbs of Madrid in Spain. They were in an area, I guess they were in Venezuela also, as they came out of Venezuela, scattering around the different places. And they hadn't found a good Church of Christ. I think they had found a few other Christians to assemble with, but he says they were getting discouraged. And I said, you know, that's what I like to find. I don't like to find the places that everybody else goes. I like to find the places that not many people go and can go there. If it's a handful, that's fine with me, if I can be an encouragement to them. And so since we left there, he and I have been corresponding. He corresponded with his relatives, and Lord willing, and I'm making the arrangements now and asking permission to be gone. It may be that this December, 3 months from now, they have said that I am welcome to come there and meet with them and teach them and study with them. And I hope maybe that will come to fruition. So, people in Venezuela that I met in Buenos Aires, helping me have a contact in Spain. Also, the son of a friend of mine has spent some time in Brussels, Belgium, and he's put me in contact with a group there. So we'll see how that turns out. So, finished in Buenos Aires, now to go down to Uruguay, Montevideo. And I've shown there is the path. This is Buenos Aires is over here, Montevideo. How do you get from one place to the other? You can take the plane, or you can drive for 7 or 8 hours, or you can take a 2-hour ride on the Buki bus, or as they would say, the Buki boots. I tell you, that is one big ferry. The picture on the left-hand side is taking across the ferry. I mean, it's long. This is the width of it, not the length of it. It was huge, and it took cars also. And how do you keep a big ferry like that clean? You give the passengers the little booties to put over their shoes. You can see those up there. So anyhow, so now we're going over to Uruguay. one more point. One of the pains in traveling is going through immigration. Bookie Boo's had it figured out. That's Diego, and there are two windows there to his right. It looks like one big window. But when you go from one country to another, you have to formally exit one country and then formally enter the next country. And if you remember your elementary school, those are different words. Immigrate with an E is going out, immigrate with an I is coming in. They had windows side by side. You go to one window and you're out of that country, the next window and you're into the next country. Could not have been more convenient. So, Montevideo in Uruguay, they didn't seem to have any big fancy monument or anything, but they had a really big sign that had their name on it. Maybe that's their version of the Hollywood sign. Don't know. But, of course, that area was where Diego Bravo was from. He was from Montevideo. So I had a chance to, of course, his family was with him already. We went there and had a chance to visit his apartment there. Very nice. Had a chance to meet his parents. His parents were Christians. And I've forgotten now whether that's some of the ones he converted. I have an idea that perhaps it was. So it was a joy to meet them and talk with them. And he had arranged some other opportunities for me to study the Bible, teach some lessons, study the Bible with some people, and had an opportunity to do that in Uruguay. And this is one of those kind of late at night Bible studies, sort of whosoever will may come, and those who are willing did. And very nice group of people. Enjoyed the opportunity to be with them. And so then it's time to go home. So how do you get home from Uruguay? You take the boogie bus back to Buenos Aires, and then you take the flight back to the U.S., back by way of Atlanta. I tell you, Atlanta and Houston also, they really have the immigration and customs process down to a very simple rule. You come in, you take a picture, you get like a little ID card, you go through the line with that, and it's very easy. So, thank you all again. You have been encouraging me and supporting me in various ways for, I guess, probably about 10 years now on these journeys. And I have been blessed to have enough good health and enough energy. And I hope I will maybe to do this for a couple more years. I know it's not going to last forever. And sometimes when I think of that, I feel some urgency to, if there are other places I think I can go and do some good to try to get there. So, Lord willing, in December, visit those stragglers of the church, if you will, in the areas of Spain, around Madrid. Hopefully can encourage them, and maybe some others along the way. It's a great message that we have. When I teach courses on evangelism, I try to remind everybody, this is not bad news. You read John 3:16, God so loved the world that he sent his son, and you read the next verse, it says, he didn't come into the world to condemn the world. He came into the world to save the world. And I fear that some of our brethren have kind of gotten that mixed up. They feel like when they go to talk to people who are not Christians, first thing they need to tell them is just how lost they are, how condemned they are. What we have is a good news message. And we need to have that attitude when we spread it. It's good news. And most of you have heard the good news. You've accepted the good news. If there's some who have not, you need to do that. Just like the chart that I had, you need to believe and confess and be baptized. All of those things are linked with salvation. In Portuguese, they're linked with the same word. In the American Standard Version of 1901, they're linked with the same word. In the Greek text, they're linked with the same word. All three are equally necessary. It would be logically inconsistent to say that one is necessary but the other two are not. Or that two are necessary but the third is not. Although sadly, that's what many in the religious world do. They say repentance, confession are necessary but baptism is not. That's not only bad theology, that's bad logic. They're all connected together with the same powerful Greek linking preposition. So if any here have not done that, you need to do that. And if you know people who haven't done that, invite them in. Maybe they can learn that they do need to do that. Or if there's any other way that we can be a source of help or encouragement to any of you, please come forward as we sing. Amen.